apparently it's really, really toxic to love yourself. Recently, I was in a store, an infinite store, a store that never ends, ever. You can walk for miles. It's called Hobby Lobby. And they have the very best playlists in the background, musical playlists, like music from the 90s, Christian music from the 90s. So if you went to youth group in the 80s or 90s, it is your jam. You're like, oh, I forgot all about that song because that was 50 years ago. But if you're married and your wife likes Hobby Lobby, you entertain her by going through the lanes of Santa Claus and Christmas and Grinch and fall decor and artistry. Okay, anyway, there's a book in there that I saw and I thought, how about that? It piqued my attention. The name of the book is called You're Not Enough, and that's okay. Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love by Ali Stuckey. You're not enough, and that's okay. Escaping the toxic culture of self-love. I thought, wow, I didn't know it was toxic. And then I looked inside the flap, and here's what she says. I thought I'd make some quick remarks on this because I talk often in my videos and my podcast, as in virtually every single therapist would, and that is the importance of self-love. Here's what she says in the front cover. We're told that the key to happiness is self-love. I want to pause there and say, by whom? I'm sure it's said, but that matters a lot in scholarship. When we have these generic things like this, they're not good. In scholarship, you say, no, says whom? You want to have quotations, you want to have footnotes, but she doesn't. And then she says, Instagram influencers. And I go, oh, well, then I don't care. Mommy bloggers, self-help gurus, and even Christian teachers promise that if we learn to love ourselves, we'll be successful, secure, and complete. Well, I have never, ever said that, and I'm a Christian teacher, so that's unfortunate that she's heard that and that she has Instagram influencers that tell her that, mommy bloggers. I'm serious because that's unfortunate. I've never in my life thought that you're not successful, secure, and complete without loving yourself. But then she says, but the promise doesn't deliver. I agree with that. Instead of feeling fulfilled, our pursuit of self-love traps us in an exhausting cycle. As we strive for self-acceptance, we become addicted to self-improvement. And I'll read that sentence one more time. That's a big, big claim. Instead of feeling fulfilled, our pursuit of self-love traps us in an exhausting cycle. As we strive for self-acceptance, we become addicted to self-improvement. Right off the bat, I know that's not true at all. So she doesn't know what it means to strive for self-acceptance. Anybody who knows anything about self-acceptance knows that you are not having healthy self-acceptance if you're addicted to self-improvement. Those aren't even the same thing. And self-improvement is not self-acceptance. And so so many things tell me that she don't know what she's talking about in this sentence. She don't know what self-love is, apparently. She don't know what self-acceptance is, because self-improvement doesn't go, these two things don't go together. Now, I'm not just picking on the ideas. I'm going to unpack this more in a second, tell you what it is, what it should be. And then she says, the truth is that we can't find satisfaction inside ourselves because we are the problem. And notice she's changed the subject now. Now we're talking about satisfaction. And that's not what anybody's talked about. She hadn't used the word one time yet of satisfaction. Self-love is not the same as satisfaction. They're not the same thing. So when she says the truth is we can't find satisfaction inside ourselves because we are the problem, I would say, who said you're trying to find that? She says we struggle with feelings of inadequacy because we are inadequate. Well, partly that's true. Oftentimes people struggle with feelings of inadequacy because they struggle with shame because they have been abused or neglected as children. It's not because they are inadequate. They have false senses of guilt and shame. So that's just simply not true. That the reason why all people struggle with feelings of inadequacy is because you're inadequate. What that does is reinforce the people who already think really bad, stupid things about themselves. And they're stupid because they're false, and they're stupid they got there because some kind of horrible caretaker taught them these things. And so right off the bat, I'm shaking my head, no. Then she says, alone we are not good enough, smart enough, or beautiful enough. To which I would say, how could you say that? To whom? She says, we're not enough, period. And that's okay because God is. Right now we've changed the subject completely. So self-love has nothing to do with morality or a moral character. And God, he says, that's okay because God is. Well, God is smart enough, right? He's omniscient. God is good enough, that's right. God can't be beautiful enough. God doesn't have beauty. So God can't be beautiful, which means he can't be enough, which means God cannot feel the satisfaction of being beautiful because he doesn't have pulchritude. He doesn't have physical appearance and therefore have physical beauty. And so if she thinks that, then I don't know what God she's talking of. Maybe a Hindu God, maybe a Greco-Roman God or a Scandinavian, Norwegian God, but not the Christian God. But I'm assuming she's already said Christian teachers. So it's silly. Christians should never think that God's beautiful. I've heard some songs like that, but it's really bad songwriting. God's not beautiful. Then it says, the answer to our insufficiency and insecurity isn't self-love, but God's love. To that I'd say, well, kind of. And I'll say more about that in a little bit, kind of. In Jesus, we're offered a way out of our toxic culture of self-love. And of course, that tips her hat to say she thinks self-love is toxic. I'm not convinced it is. And then she says, and a way into a joyful life of relying on him for wisdom, right, has nothing to do with self-love, right? Satisfaction, right, has nothing to do with self-love. And purpose, right, has nothing to do with self-love. We don't have, quote, we don't have to wonder what it's all about anymore. This is it. So I appreciate off the bat, she's trying to do, it seems to me, she's trying to say, listen, some of you really, a lot of us, particularly females, really struggle with the constant sense of not being good enough. And so what you need to do is stop fighting that, embrace it. You aren't good enough, and that's okay. God still loves you. And let God be for who you are. And of course, on one hand, I'd say, well, of course that's true. There's a degree to which God is the source of hope and joy and purpose in life. Of course, that's exactly right. And self-love doesn't give you purpose in life. Self-love doesn't make you beautiful. Self-love doesn't necessarily give you satisfaction. Once again, as I've said many times on my podcasts and blogs and sermons and on, self-love means to love yourself. You're welcome. It took me, I have a PhD, don't forget that. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass, 3 advanced degrees, and self-love means to love yourself. It's profound, it's deep. That's all it means, though. Let's just be silly, but seriously, that's all it is. What does it mean to love? Okay, in the New Testament, to love means to love your neighbor, means to care for their good. Go read Luke 6 when he says, well, I've done this so many times to other podcasts and blogs and videos, to love yourself, to love your neighbor as yourself. What Jesus said, right? Mark 12:31, love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus implicitly commanded to love yourself. Well, apparently Jesus didn't read this woman's book because Jesus didn't know that self-love was toxic. And apparently Jesus is inept. He's incompetent because he told people, in essence, love your neighbor, which means seek their improvement and get addicted to it. So I want you to be addicted to a toxic sense of loving the self-improvement and satisfaction of your neighbors. Well, that's silly. I mean, that's not what Jesus said. And I bet if we interview this woman, she wouldn't say, oh, no, I don't think Jesus is inept, but that's what you just implied. Because Jesus said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. So let's start with Jesus and not this other. Let's don't start with TikTok, Instagram influencers. Let's start with Jesus. Jesus said to love your neighbors, love yourself. What does that mean? It means to care for their good as much as you care for your own good. That's it. So if you care for your own shelter and food and so forth, well, care about your neighbors. Don't be profoundly egocentric. And that includes mental and emotional health. I care about people not being bullied, so I don't bully them and I don't bully myself. That's it. I mean, I care for them. That's it. That's it. That's it. That doesn't mean I have incessant self-improvement. That doesn't mean I chase after being something I'm not. It means accepting myself to care for myself good enough to take care of my good. That's it. That's all it means. All this other stuff she said to me is completely irrelevant. I've known people who might have good self-love, but don't know what their purpose is because they're not Christians and so forth. Sure. But they I care for my own good and I love myself. I take care of my needs and I exercise and eat healthy and I read books for mental health, and I try to get education. I try to use my gifts for my stewardship. But yeah, in that sense, I love myself. And loving yourself doesn't mean you think you're better than other people. That's arrogance. That's a kind of pride. That's not what loving yourself means. Loving yourself doesn't mean you hate God. It doesn't mean you're independent of God. It doesn't mean you worship the devil. It just means you care for your own good, like you care for your neighbor's good. Well, why would that drive someone to a toxic cycle of self-improvement? It tells me when people say things like this, and I'll just assume the benefit of the doubt that the person is telling the truth, that this really is the review and they're not being disingenuous. It tells me that they don't know what self-love is. And that's sad. It's unfortunate. One, again, why? Because Jesus said we're supposed to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so I want to be obedient to the Lord Jesus. And two, it's unhealthy. It's sad to think that what you think is that a person has to chase after something, self-improvement for the rest of your entire life. That doesn't make any sense. That's performance. That's the opposite of self-love. That is conditional acceptance based on performance. That is exactly what he did not mean. That is exactly. He didn't say love your neighbor in as much as they can be satisfied, but they can't be. I can't even think of a good analogy because it sounds so silly to me. I don't know. I mean, it's the exact opposite. So, Christian, I do hope you love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, I want to know in counseling, I would ask you, if I were a therapist, I'd say, why? Why do you struggle with caring for your own good? Why do you struggle if you said the words, I love you, or to your child, inner child, if you said, I love myself? I could never say that. Could you say I love you to someone else? Well, of course. What about you? No, I could never say it to myself. Well, why not? Well, that's worth exploring, and I guarantee you have some wounds in there. I guarantee it. I guarantee it's not because you're just so humble. I think it's because you have some woundedness inside you, and that is worth exploring. I don't think it's toxic, that you might want to care about it, because I care about it for you. I'd say you're supposed to love yourself. That's a good thing. It's healthy. Why would you be? I mean, the opposite of loving yourself is hating yourself. That's toxic. That's sick. That's sad. That's not what Jesus wants us to do, is to hate ourselves. And that's not being humble either. So I hear you, friend who wrote this book, but I'm not going to read your book because I couldn't go through the front flap without disagreeing with almost every word. But I want to encourage you that if you ever come across things like this that seem to reinforce the fact that you should never, ever think about yourself ever, and only think about God, my response is Jesus disagrees with that. Jesus disagrees with that, Mark 12:31. And that's important to me because I want to be obedient to him. And I want to love my neighbor as I love myself, which means I got to love myself. That's okay. That's good. It's healthy. That's good. That's all for now. What are your thoughts? Tell me your comments down below. Share this video with your friends, and I'll see you next time.